Hello, everybody, and welcome to Craft Authors in Conversation. I'm Denise Kiernan, and tonight's craft promises to be an evening of, well, an evening of sorts. I'm joined tonight by writer and journalist Joseph Dagnies, whom I know tolerably well for a number of years. And we are going to have a wild, rambunctious time. Hopefully I will find something out about Joe that I don't already know. You guys will certainly learn a lot about him. For those of you who are new to Craft originally started live in person at Little Jumbo, a delightful cocktail bar here in Asheville, North Carolina, where I would sit down with authors and talk to them about how they do what they do. And we had craft cocktails inspired by whichever author I was speaking to or their work, crafted by Shawl Gray, co-owner and mixologist over at Little Jumbo. In these times, we should be going live again soon, I think. I hope. We're talking about it. But we shifted here to Crowdcast, which has actually enabled me to talk to people who are actually much further away than here in Asheville, although right now I'm talking to someone who is upstairs. So that this was very easy. And as always, Malaprops, my lovely, lovely local independent bookstore, is providing books for the evening. You will see a little green button down there at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to order signed copies of any of my books or Joe's books, you can do so by clicking on that button, and Malaprops will get us in to autograph those, personalize them if you want, and they'll ship them out just like that. Or buy books from your own local indie. Support local indies. Support all local businesses right now. Everybody's still getting back up on their feet. Okay, a little bit of, so we're going to talk for a little while. You can ask questions of Joe. Please ask lots of questions of Joe, really probing, uncomfortable ones, because that'll make it more fun. If you want to, though, don't put them in the chat, please. Put them in the Ask a Question. I see someone has already done that. So that way I can make sure I see them all and I don't miss anything, because I can't really kind of monitor the chat while I do this. Usually I have this guy in the chat room kind of corralling comments, but I'm talking to that guy right now, so I don't have him there anymore. So Joe is not lurking. Those of you who are repeat attendees, Joe usually lurks in the chat room and wrangles websites and all sorts of minutia that come up during conversations. But instead, Joe is right here and he's going to bring us his own version of minutia live right now. Hi, Joe.
Merry Christmas.
How are things upstairs? Is everything okay?
Yeah, the air conditioning is working really well, but somehow I'm still sweating.
Okay, excellent. Glad to hear it. Good way to start off.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to be here.
I would rather not have probing questions put in the box, because when I turned 50, I learned that some probing is uncomfortable.
Oh my God, I can't believe I keep laughing at that joke. So you're an author, you're a journalist, you love and have your entire life mysteries. You love mysteries.
Yeah. Yes.
Who are some of your favorite authors?
So we're going to answer these questions seriously now. Okay.
Answer them however you want. I mean, you know.
Well, it depends. Like, so the biggest, the author that I read the most earliest on was Ellery Queen, and it was because of the Jim Hutton TV show back in the day.
Hutton. Father of Timothy Hutton.
Okay, I couldn't remember if it was Tim or Jim. Jim Hutton.
No, it was Jim, but he's the father of Tim.
And I love that show, which I think ran for like one very long, pathetic season. And then it was canceled. But what's interesting is that the two guys who developed and ran that show later went on to create a little something called Murder, She Wrote. which I did not like nearly as much as I liked Ellery Queen. But I did read all those books in pretty much right away, looking for them in libraries and bookstores, uh, almost until I reached high school. And then it was like I ran out of Ellery Queen. Like I would walk into bookstores and I'd go right to the queues. And it was like, where's the Queen? I can't find Ellery Queen. And then, but what I didn't know was that there was this mysterious moment, like as soon as that show went off the air, they stopped printing Ellery Queen because there had been like this period where Ellery Queen just fell out of favor. So then I was like, well, shoot, I got to find other books to read. And then I would read the Nero Wolfe mysteries by Rex Stout, which are kind of awesome. And then mixing it up with like Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers. So like very golden age. Well, yeah, I guess you would say golden age mysteries. Before I got into like crime or noir as I got older. Hammett, Chandler, all those guys that you sort of like, you have to read those if you're gonna get into, serious noir fiction. So yeah, that's my reading resume.
That's your reading resume. I mean, but what's interesting to me is you have read pretty much every mystery that's ever been written. You like writing mysteries, but what a lot of people don't know is that you also like solving mysteries, and in fact had your own detective agency. Tell everyone a little bit about that.
It's kind of pathetic.
This is one of my favorite stories. Make it good.
Okay. So
you had your own detective. You sent out. You had business cards.
Okay. I came home. I stole a bunch of these like little index cards from my father and pens from his little workshop in our garage, and I wrote up these little cards that said Dagny's Detective Agency, no case too small, 25 cents. Now,
how old were you? How old were you?
I mean, I was that age that you would do that. I wasn't like 21. So
you were 18.
I was not 18. So astute viewers will note that is exactly the language, with the exception of the surname, that was used in the Encyclopedia Brown mysteries by Donald Sobel, which is what, that's your entree to mysteries, unless you read Hardy Boys. I wasn't really into the Hardy Boys. I read a couple of them. I thought they were lame, but I did like Encyclopedia Brown. They were brilliant, and they always, well, he did the same thing that Ellery Queen did, which is at the end, it was like Encyclopedia Brown would say something cryptic, and it would be like, I know who did it. And then the story would end, and then the author would say, like, do you know how he figured it out? Turn to the back of the book to get the answer, which is exactly what, Ellery Queen did something similar. We did this challenge to the reader thing, and they even replicated that in the TV show, which I loved. So I get my brothers to help me distribute these index cards all over the neighborhood in people's mailboxes. And next thing you know, like some big kids show up and they want me to like find one of the kids lost his bicycle. And this thing devolves and turns very nasty very quickly, where they're like, well, if you can't, and I'm like, as soon as it came out of their mouth, I was like, I can't take this case, because I'm thinking to myself, like, I have no freaking idea how to be a detective.
I can't take this
First
case.
time that occurred to me.
Another case, but I can't take this case.
First time that occurred to me. I can't take this case. And they're like, it says right here on the card, no case too small. I'm like, no, this case is too big. So that was the end of that. Was like it was like an open and shut business, not an open and shut case. That was the last case it ended. But until a couple of weeks later, my father is on the bus going to the New York City where he works in the garment district. And this woman sits down next to him and says, "So you're a detective?" And he's looking at her like, "Lady, what are you talking about? I'm not a detective," he said. And he's like, she tells him the story, like, "I found this thing, blah, blah." He's like, "That's got to be one of my crazy kids." And she's like, "Oh, I thought so." She's like, "I needed someone to help me find my sweater." And I thought, that's a case I could have done. I could have cracked the case of the missing cardigan. So, but I've never hung a shingle out ever since then of any kind.
Now,
So that was my brief, lamentable career as a private eye.
now you mentioned your father, and didn't your father actually serve as your first literary agent?
Yes, actually, although he wouldn't probably say that, but I had written a book when I was like 15 years old. Like, I got a manual typewriter, and I'm typing. What? I see you about to say.
Yes, well, I always am. But you wrote a book at 15?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's normal for most people who are interested in writing. Is that true?
An entire book? I don't know, maybe.
If you agree, put your comments here or here. Yeah, so I wrote.
Writing stories and plays and stuff, yes, but like you wrote a big ass book.
So I write this book and I type it like it was during the summer, so like I had a lot of time. I'm like, I would handwrite it first in these composition notebooks, and then I would sit on the picnic table on the patio and type it all up. And I typed it up, and I get these copies made, and I give one to.
You had to go photocopy the whole thing?
Yeah, I photocopy the whole book. So
okay.
Photocopy the book. I think I made 2 or 3 copies and gave one. One goes with my father. It goes into his briefcase. He has this ugly briefcase, gray briefcase, that plastic briefcase that he would bring to the garment district every day. And I'm thinking, like, he's going to read this on the bus, blah, blah, blah. He comes home one day and he says, you're coming with me on Friday to New York. You have to meet this editor who wants to talk to you about this book of yours. Now, my father made women's coats. How did a man who makes, like, what kind of editor is this? Well, actually, it was an editor at a little something my father kept referring to as the Bantam. which again,
like superhero.
Listeners will know is Bantam Doubleday Books, one of the largest publishers of paperbacks at the time, before they got consumed probably by Random House. So as it turns out, so like if those of you are listening to this and you're like thinking, how can I break into the exciting world of New York publishing? Here's how you do it. My father worked with, and the coats that he made, some of them were bought by a buyer for Montgomery Ward, which I think has also been bought by Random House. Turns out that this buyer had a sister, younger or older, I could never figure out, but she worked as like an assistant or administrative assistant to this editor at a publishing house. So my father's thinking, like, I can stop carrying this hunk of paper in my briefcase. Here, he says, gives it to the buyer of it at Montgomery Ward, who gives it to her sister, who gives it to her editor. And the next thing you know, the editor is saying to the sister, get this kid in here. We'll, let's talk to him, blah, blah,
Get
blah.
that kid on the horn.
Get the kid on the horn. No, well, whatever. So I go in one day and we're like all dressed up. My father's even dressed up. I got a tie, I got a jacket. And I have like a little tiny notebook because I'm thinking like the editor is going to give me notes or something. And it was a very exciting thing to go to that building, which I think is still there, the top of this. The used to be the restaurant called the Top of the Sixes. It was 666 6th Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone ring a bell? Or 5th Avenue? 6th? I think it was 6th Avenue.
Probably 6th. A lot of the publishing houses are on 6th.
Yeah, someone will know. So I get there and I'm talking to the editor, and all, in retrospect, I think she was just trying to be a nice person and, encourage me. And she was like, this reads really fun. It's blah, blah, blah. It's great. Just keep writing. You're going to be doing great things. And, starts listing names of authors that I should read. And then starts pulling paperbacks off the bookshelf that she's going to give me to take home and read. And some of them I think were above my reading level even at the time, and in the sense that they were very mature, sexually mature, perhaps, books. But offhandedly, she says, I even considered, would we ever publish something like this? She's like, but there's a lot of implausibilities that I notice as an adult that probably wouldn't occur to you, and it would take too long for you to figure out how to fix those. I think you should just write another book and just keep writing. And I stayed in touch with this one. But to think about like me going home on the bus with my father, and I'm already like got this writer brain, which is saying like, implausibilities. What does she mean by that? Oh my God, it's implausible. What does that mean? And I get home and I'm looking up the word implausibilities in the dictionary. And I go to bed that night obsessing about these implausibilities. And I'm like, this sucks. I can't, what am I going to do? I'm never going to be a writer. And what's funny here is the following. That book, a copy of that manuscript has traveled with me to every place I've ever lived. And I found it in the basement a couple of years ago. And I pick it up and I'm like, I still like the story. Maybe I can do something with this now.
How many years after you wrote it?
It's like 40 years. I mean, this is 40 years, right? I was 15 then. I'm 55-ish now.
Emphasis on it. Yeah.
But here's the funny part. Well, I think it's funny. I'm sitting there reading this, and I'm thinking, well, that wouldn't work. That doesn't make sense. This is very implausible. This thing is riddled with implausibilities. But that's but that book, I did rewrite that entire book, and that became Murder on Book Row, which was just it was the classic story of a bookseller in New York who solves mysteries. And I basically swiped the entire concept from the Nero Wolfe mysteries, where you have a really smart detective, but who never leaves her armchair. And she has a nephew who's a private eye who goes out and does all the legwork and then brings the pieces of the puzzle back to her, and she fits it together in her brain. It's like, oh, I know who did that. And I promise that the only thing implausible in this book is that that a bookseller could actually have a bookstore in New York City.
No, but I mean, you dig this book out after 40 years, and that's not the only story you dug up from your past, because you, in a kind of full circle kind of way, you love Ellery Queen. Look at you. You don't know where I'm going with this. You loved Ellery Queen.
We did not script this, by the way. This is unscripted. She's asking me questions that are making me nervous.
I wouldn't tell. Calm down. Take a breath. Also, Lauren Harr gave you a great band name, Sweaty Joe and the Live Minutiae. You watched Ellery Queen, you read Ellery Queen, and then so many years later, you started digging up old stories and submitting them to Ellery Queen's magazine.
Ellery Queen's and its sister publication, Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine. The story that I submitted to them, I don't really understand why I started getting. I used to write short stories, and I subscribed to Ellery Queen's and occasionally Hitchcock's when I was a kid, and I figured out like, oh, because there was like a little tiny, there was a little bit of information about submissions in the bottom of their indicia in the back of the magazine. And it would say like, here's where you send, please, if you're going to send us a story, make sure you send a SAISY, self-addressed stamped envelope. So I wrote stories on my manual typewriter and mailed them to them. And they were, all soundly rejected, probably because of implausibilities. But there was one story I wrote in college that for some reason I dug out one day, and of course it had to be retyped into a computer because I think it was originally printed on dot matrix. And I submitted it to Ellery Queen's, and they rejected it. And I sent it into Hitchcock's, and they held on to it for weeks. And my whole time thinking about this was like, the whole time it went out, I was like, I can't believe I sent them a story that was 25 years old. I'm probably a better writer today than I was in college. How stupid is that? And by the way, this is not a story that anyone would care about. It's not really a crime story. Well, lo and behold, they bought it, and the woman liked it because, see, all my stories come back to the garment district. If this was a story that was set in the garment district, and which I had observed as a kid, and then wrote about as a college student. So now I'm beginning to think that everything that I have that is like crappy stuff, or as another writer that I like says, he actually packaged and self-published a book called The Early Crap. So what I think I should do is just take all my early crap, edit it with adult eyes, and then just send it out to places and or self-publish those books, and just like I did with Murder on Book Row.
See, but this is interesting to me because so many people, it's very easy to submit now, right? I mean, it's an email where you don't have to like print things up and get an envelope and put another envelope inside that envelope so they can write you back. I mean, now you can just send emails to people, but you, in a sense, I know you wouldn't agree with this, but there's like this weird optimism to what you've been doing. And I know you don't think of yourself as an optimist, but you didn't give up on these stories just because they didn't go somewhere initially. You actually kept revisiting them and eventually found homes for a few of them. So, I mean, for people who get discouraged by rejections, I mean, what would you say about holding on to your early crap or revisiting your early crap?
You should always hold on to anything you should always hold on to the early crap. But more importantly, whenever you cut stuff from a book, you should probably, or anything you write, you should probably cut and paste it into another document just to look at later. Chances are you're not going to use it, but every now and then there's like a turn of phrase that you like. But the coolest thing, which is less than 24 hours old, that I've heard about publishing is this. See if you agree. this guy, I think I saw it on Twitter or I saw it on Instagram. Basically, what he said is like, everyone in publishing, everyone in New York publishing, they're merely passing through. And you and I, how many times have we had editors that bought a book from us, and by the time the book came out, they have moved on. Like
Oh
one
yeah,
woman I went to law school.
yeah,
I can't blame her because publishing pays horribly. But other editors go to another house.
yeah.
So in a way, they are, as this person put, they are temporary workers. And yet we submit ourselves to we submit our stories to, well, we submit ourselves.
Yes, yes, yes.
We submit our work to these temporary workers who, because of their position in the industry or the current position in the industry, make permanent freaking decisions about our careers. So hold on to everything, keep believing, and keep sending shit out. Oh, pardon me, I'm not supposed to say dirty word.
Yeah, fuck that.
So, I mean, that I think was a very telling thing, because it is completely true that, like, if you send out a proposal, if you send out a novel and they reject it, that decision is really being made by someone who's not going to be in that job, I swear to you, in 3 to 5 years or even 6 months. So that their opinion was always subjective in the first place. But if it actually comes through where they buy the book and they make decisions about your marketing and stuff, it's like, hey, wait a second, your marketing decisions impact the rest of my career and how I will be perceived by the industry going forward. Because there are many stories about writers from not the golden age, but like this later pulp era and later, where they were always trying to stay ahead of the numbers, because as soon as publishers figured out, like, well, this guy's last book or this woman's last book, we got a ton of returns, they couldn't sell any more books under their name, so they would come up with like more. They'd come up with like a ton of pen names that they would write books under and start new series under those pen names, so they could stay ahead and be able to keep working. You look like you don't believe me. I'm telling you.
I do believe you. I do believe you. I do believe you. But you couldn't pull that off today. I don't think.
Watch me.
But you should still hold on to your old crap. No, I mean, there's an optimism to what you did with your old work. Because I personally feel like having a few different irons in the fire always kind of keeps you limber and also doesn't pin all of your attention, energy, hopes to any one particular project. Now, don't you think?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at my sort of writing resume and maybe even yours, you see a person who is writing many different things in many different genres. Like, I wrote a children's picture book on math.
Which actually, not to interrupt, but Neil Thompson, that's why they call him Joey Numbers, because he wrote a book.
Yeah.
That's because he wrote a book about Fibonacci.
Did he ask that?
Yeah. Yes, it's in the, he didn't appropriately ask in the ask a question, but it's okay. I saw it in the chat.
Okay.
And
so like I wrote a personal. Wait, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you correctly.
Talk about Fibonacci. Fibonacci.
Okay. Well, actually, I have another story grounded in my childhood, which was that I was convinced as a kid that because I hated math and I hated science, and In fact, my brother just asked me a couple of days ago, when was the last math class you ever had? And it was senior year of high school, because I figured out with when I went to Syracuse University, um, as a freshman, I could figure out like I can basically I can skip math if I take a foreign language. So I basically signed up for Italian 101 since I had taken Italian for 4 years in high school, but did have to take science classes, and I took, basically rocks for jocks is what they called it, geology 101 and astronomy 101, which was actually, and both of these were both very interesting. But lo and behold, so I'm here, I am avoiding working to orchestrate my life so I can avoid hard math and hard science in, upper levels of academia. And when I get out of school, where am I working? I'm working for Scholastic magazines. What am I doing? I'm editing a children's math magazine. But here's the thing. What I quickly realized, well, maybe it took me a while to realize this, was that what scared me as a kid was what we would call computation. And all that means is if I had to add up a line of numbers, 8 plus 7 plus 6 plus 23 plus 4 plus 107, I can't do that very well in my head. And there were kids that I knew that I envied in first grade that could do that. Like I remember this kid, Rusty's, staring at the screen, and it wasn't a screen back then. It was a chalkboard. We wrote chalk. Okay. And he could add all these numbers in his head. And I'm like, how could he do that? I don't have enough fingers to count all the numbers that they're asking me to count. But what the parts of math that I actually loved were algebra and trigonometry and geometry and calculus. So those are all high school things, but it's like back by then it was like, do the computation with a calculator. We don't care. No one does the computation in their head except for, people who want to stay limber and convince themselves that they can do it. It's like, it's all about, working with the mathematical concept. So at Scholastic, I discovered the story of Leonardo Fibonacci, who was an Italian mathematician, grew up in Pisa during the Middle Ages, and his name is associated with something we call the Fibonacci sequence, which is this remarkable number pattern that is unusual for number patterns, but it theoretically or supposedly appears in nature because the idea of a spiral is suggestive. The Fibonacci sequence can be used to create spirals, and it is suggestive of the Fibonacci sequence. The Nautilus shell is the classic example, but like nebulae.
Nebuluses? I don't know.
Nebuluses.
You're the one who took astronomy for jocks. I don't know.
Right, but that's the point. Like stuff that kind of stuff was cool. It was multicultural in the sense that he was from Europe, Southern Europe, but Europe, and he travels to Algeria, which was as far as you traveled in the Mediterranean basin at that time. His father was a merchant, and he's constantly studying numbers. And he gets to Algeria and he realizes, like, they're not using Roman numerals. What's wrong with these people? And it figures out that they're using Hindu Arabic numerals, which were so much more elegant, and they had the concept of zero that does not exist in Roman numerals. And he learns all he can about Hindu Arabic numerals, and when he comes back to Italy, probably as an older man, starts writing about them and writes a couple of books about how you can use these Hindu Arabic numerals and what they can do. And what's interesting at the back of his book, just to give people fluency with Hindu Arabic numerals, he starts giving them basically what we would call word problems. Like, and the classic one was a man has two rabbits and he puts them in a box. And after a month, guess what? He has even more rabbits.
Yeah.
And how at the end of, at the end of 12 months, how many rabbits is he going to have? And what's interesting is if you follow this thing, it comes up, it creates this interesting sequence, 1 or 0, 1, 1. Each number, the each two numbers added together come up equal the subsequent or next consecutive number in the sequence, and it goes on forever. And he sort of stumbled about it, but he doesn't assign any kind of significance to that. And only later do people start playing with these numbers and realizing how much more interesting they are. So he did not put 2 and 2 together. He did not put 1 and 2 together to get 3. He did not figure out that the Fibonacci.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So in other words, he did not know the Fibonacci sequence, that the thing that he stumbled across. He just gave the answer in his little workbook, and later mathematicians figured out how cool they really were and wrote reams of books about those special numbers. But I just thought that the story was so interesting about this guy. That was the first children's book. That really was the first book I ever did, was a children's book. And the way I sold it was I gave it to my father, and then he took
it to the garment district. No.
He took it to the garment district.
No, but you
made a jacket out of rabbit fur.
You're a person who didn't like math and didn't like science and loved mysteries, and you go work for a math magazine and write a book about a mathematician.
It's worse. It's worse, as you know. Go ahead.
Well, so what made you decide to finally, and that's an award-winning children's book and amazing, and it's called Blockhead. I highly recommend it. If you click on that button down there below, you can get a copy from Malaprops. What gave you, I guess, what made you want to return to, your love, mystery? Because you've been a ghostwriter, you've been a journalist, you've written about science, you've written about math, you've written other people's biographies. What made you want to kind of turn back to what really mattered to you, and how did those other experiences kind of inform your process?
The only thing I can say about that is I think you find you develop an affection for a certain genre of writing that seems like it's very, very fun. I mean, I read a lot of different types of novels, in my life and in my childhood, but the ones that stayed with me were mysteries, I think. I don't know. I mean, it's not like I don't want to write like a great American literary novel, but if I can figure out how I can kill someone in the course of the story.
You went back later in life to what you originally wanted to do.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, do you think your experience, ghostwriting, for example, so many different subjects, so many different people, so many different personalities. Do you think ghostwriting has influenced your mystery writing at all?
No, I don't think ghostwriting has influenced the mysteries. What I do think has influenced all the fiction I write is just being trained as a reporter and working for a reporter as a reporter for the biggest chunk of my life before I started writing writing books and writing books for other people, it's like the more you learn, stuff sticks in your head, and suddenly you feel like, well, it's not so daunting to write a book where you need to have like, 12 characters, all of whom want somebody dead. Um, and you need to have convincing characters who from different walks of life. So, by the time you start filling in these people's backgrounds, suddenly it's like, oh yeah, I know a little bit about astronomy. I know a little bit about, probably one day it's going to be legal marijuana entrepreneurship because I wrote a book for some guy about that. So it's like, oh yeah, I mean that's the kind of thing. Is like the more you interview. I interviewed scientists. I wrote for Discover magazine. There's always something shady or dodgy going on in um, the science world, even though it's supposed to be this veneer of professionalism. Um, there was one Japanese scientist that you remember a few years back who committed suicide when they found that he had made an error, or some of the information in his paper that was published to wide acclaim was had been falsified, and he didn't know his colleagues had done it, I think, and he felt terrible about it. He killed himself. That's a perfect opening for a mystery. It doesn't have to take place in Japan, but boy, do the Japanese love mysteries.
Do they?
Oh,
They read a lot of mysteries.
oh my God, that's the funny thing. Ellery Queen, I would say if you went to a store today and tried to a bookstore, a real brick and mortar bookstore, and tried to look for Ellery Queen, you wouldn't be able to find a print copy of Ellery Queen's books. They've been out of print in the United States for ages, and there are tons of like mystery literature scholars who have all these theories about why his books don't really sell, while Agatha Christie and everybody else from that era do. But guess where his books are selling like sushi? They're selling really well in Japan. People in Japan love Ellery Queen. He's one of the most revered mystery writers there, or rather they are.
Now, in a sense, some of the research skills that you developed as a journalist, and I would argue while you were even working at Scholastic and looking into the life of, an Italian mathematician, contributed to the Christmas in July book that we're supposed to be talking about. Sorceress Kringle.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
we don't. Yeah. The amount of research, which is, spoiler alert, Santa is a woman. The amount of research that went into this epic fantasy is astounding. And, I happen to know there are a lot of books in this house that are like, the history of ice. I mean, there's the science of ice. I mean, early New York under the governor Peter Stuyvesant. I mean, so how do you know when you've done enough research for a book of this kind? It's not, it's not nonfiction, but it's impeccably researched. So how important is it to you as a writer to kind of make sure you can build out that world?
Okay. All right. I grew up in New Jersey, which growing up in New Jersey in the 1970s, I had this feeling that I was probably living in the most boring place on the planet. Nothing seemed interesting there. There seemed to be, all the houses were about the same age. There was like the suburbs. And but I was wrong. There was a lot of history, and the coolest thing about it was like, down the street from our house, was this old house that had been built in the 1600s by some Dutch dude. And all our street names were Dutch or English. Like my house where I grew up was between one main road called Knickerbocker, which, as anybody, anyone who knows Washington Irving, that is lifted right out of Washington Irving. The phrase Knickerbocker was a nickname for old New Yorkers. And the other street to the south was Schralenberg, which of course is a Dutch name. So when I did start to realize like there was history around me, there were all these old Dutch houses and they had a certain type of roof and the way they built the house. I always was interested in the Dutch and their involvement in New York, New Jersey, that area of the country where I grew up. And that interest sort of stayed with me. That's how I ended up sort of, digging into the story of Santa Claus. You can't write about Santa Claus and New York City without dealing with Washington Irving, the Dutch settlers who came there in the 1600s, and really created the first, major city on that island by Europeans. So that just sort of became the biggest thing. The coolest stuff was like, the more you dig into the story of Santa Claus, the more you realize like it has been all the little parts of what we call Santa Claus, the American Santa Claus, all came from different cultures. And it's not just the idea of Saint Nicholas. It's Odin in Norse mythology. It's Loki and Thor. It's not just flying reindeer. It's flying goats and flying horses. There's the culture of the Sami in the actually almost in Finland and all the Scandinavian countries and even Siberia. They have found stones, literally petroglyphs of these giant obelisks of reindeer chiseled into the stone, and they appear to be flying. That's really freaking cool to me that someone in New York, in the 1820s sat down and wrote a song about flying, wrote a poem about flying reindeer, and we still assume that Santa has flying reindeer. That story didn't just originate in New York from a Dutch British New Yorker. It really originated in some of the oldest, folklore on the planet, and that's just kind of awesome. Also, reindeers are just very cool. If you live in this part of the world, the reindeer is like everything to you. You raise them, you use them for transportation, you use them for food, you build your drums out of reindeer bones, and reindeer are just kind of awesome creatures. I wish they survive. I hope they survive.
But I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that makes Sorceress Kringle so amazing and such a fantastic read is how rich and how layered and how easy it is to completely sink into that other world. And it's occurring to me that we have questions, and I think I should.
It's almost, I should ask.
Yeah. Okay. What are some of the most interesting things you've learned about publishing, self-publishing, traditional publishing, etc., during your career?
What are some of the more interesting things? I'm what you call a hybrid author in the sense that I have worked and been published by traditional publishers. All my fiction is self-published. The thing that I'm learning right now that is interesting is that there are truly a number of writers who are doing extremely well in self-publishing. One of the largest genres, the most lucrative genre in fiction has always been romance. The romance writer community is huge, and they have moved into self-publishing in a huge way. I think it is quite telling, though, that probably that community has probably been treated the worst, not only by publishers, but by critics who dismissed it as crap. So I really do think that self-publishing has become a place where they can strike out on their own, become entrepreneurs, and sell really amazing stories to, legions of readers who are looking for those stories.
And Gay Daily, hi Gay, says, what did you like about Ellery Queen?
Here's what I liked about Ellery Queen. Those mysteries, especially like the first dozen or so, were so tight. They were so intricate, and you really, if you followed the clues and made the same deductions that Ellery did, you could only arrive at one person who was the murderer, and it was always someone that was a surprise. It's like, how do you do that? Even people like Rex Stout, who wrote the Nero Wolfe mysteries, he often sort of fudged things where he did not play scrupulously fair with the reader. And Nero, or rather Nero Wolfe, would know things that you didn't know because they happened off camera, so to speak. But with Ellery Queen, all the clues were right in front of you. If you assembled them in the right way that Ellery did, there was only one person who could do it. And the fun was rereading those mysteries and say, like, oh, here was this amazing clue, and look how he hid it. And that has always been like one of the things that's like mystery writing 101. Is the first thing that you learn is like how to hide a clue in plain sight. Yeah.
Don't you think being a journalist, Lauren says, is a little bit like being a detective?
Yes, and both journalists and detectives drink about the same amount. So that's one good thing. Yeah, no, I think that's the truth. Yeah, I mean, with a detective and a journalist, you're asking questions, you're doing research, you learn how to ask people uncomfortable questions and see if you can assemble some sort of a coherent story. And
truth. Trying to get to the truth.
Yeah, get to the truth. Yeah, it's the same story. But the research stuff is also the same thing. Like, how can you dig and dig and dig and dig and find just the telling details that you need to tell your story? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
And this, I know the answer to this next question, but I'm going to see if you answer it honestly.
So you answer it.
No. What is your favorite writing outfit?
My favorite writing outfit?
Writing outfit.
All right. Do I want to know who asked that question?
I'm not telling.
It's a pink bunny costume that I got one Christmas from my aunt. And even though I was already a little bit of a tall fellow, she managed to sew it big enough that I could wear it. And it's warm in the winter and it's hot in the summer, but now I can't take it off. It's the only thing that makes me feel like I'm in the writing zone.
Okay, so Joe's choosing not to answer that. Not choosing not to answer
No,
that question.
It's a hoodie and boxer shorts and slippers.
There you go.
But
That
here's
is,
what's okay,
that's
just
uniform.
in honor of your viewers today, I'm actually wearing pants.
Okay. That's pretty impressive because, like, if you look right now, Joe is in the office, and behind, over his right shoulder, is where the table and the carpet is. And the thing is, a lot of times I'll walk into the office and there will just be like just this little pile of just shorts on the floor because Joe can't keep pants on while he's writing for some reason. So when he says the boxer shorts and the hoodie, he's not kidding. So the fact that he's actually wearing pants for all of you guys is quite an honor.
I get cold up top, but I feel like I get too hot below.
Joe, where can people find you?
In my office.
In your boxer shorts. Where can people find you?
No, I don't think you want to find me.
Don't fall
I
over.
don't think you want to find me. No, you can go to josephdagnese.com.
josephdagnese.com. And we'll put all this in the recap. I will send out a recap with a link to this on YouTube. Go ahead, josephdagnese.com. Where else?
Well, you can go to the Instagram. I've been very proficient in posting like one gardening photo a day.
All right.
There.
And what is your Instagram handle?
It's at Joseph Dagnese.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I don't really have anything more creative to say than that. But I love you all. Thank you for watching.
Thank you to everybody who tuned in. Murder on
Happy
Book Road.
New Year.
Sorceress Kringle is it is Christmas in July, but Sorceress Kringle is a fascinating historical epic fantasy that everybody should check out no matter what time of year it is. And Murder on Book Row is one of my favorite cozy mysteries. And
I created a joke. Can I do my joke? Here's my bit.
Do I want to hear this?
Yeah, I think you do. Because the question was, how do I know that Santa is a woman? Here's how I know. If there was a man living who had figured out a way to live year-round in the North Pole, and he had his little cozy man cave and an army of elves, I just don't see him leaving December 24th unless they all ran out of beer. That's my joke. No one, you're the only one laughing, but okay. Thank you for watching. Happy New Year. Woo!
Okay, everybody. So Craft will return next month. I will send out
a much more interesting writer, no doubt.
We'll send out a recap with some of the topics we talked about tonight. Please order Joe's books either from Malaprops by clicking on that button right there or from your local independent bookstore. You won't be sorry. They are quite delightful. And I'll include information on how to stay up to date with what Joe is doing and what he's wearing in the office as we go forward. And everybody keep enjoying summer. And thanks as always for joining us. And we'll see you soon next time on Craft. Bye.